We're going to run this morning's session for around about 30 to 40 minutes. There will be opportunity to answer some questions. I'm really pleased to welcome Steve Gemmett from Sicon, who's going to be talking us through Sicon's WAP platform with about web authorizations. And without much further ado, as I said, if there's any questions, please feel free to pop them through the chat, or we will open up the lines at the end. But other than that, thank you very much for joining us this morning, and over to you, Steve.
That's great. Thank you, Michael, and thank you everybody for joining us. I am intending to turn my camera off in just a few moments. Nobody wants to see this on screen for that while, but my name's Steve Gemmett. I'm the head of sales here at Sicon, and obviously be delivering the presentation. So what we're going to go through, give a brief overview of who we are, and then just, I suppose, probably more of a thought leading piece on perhaps some of the considerations why organizations would start to look at technology, especially in the current climate. I've got some screenshots as well, just to show you what it looks like, and we'll talk through what other customers are doing. As Michael said, please feel free to use the chat, and we can answer those questions, or I will certainly leave a bit of time at the end if people want to unmute themselves and ask. So without further ado, let me just switch off my camera and let's get going. So Sicon, for those of you who perhaps haven't come across us as a brand, we're actually classified by Sage now as a Sage technology partner. I think last year we were an ISV, this year an STP. I don't know what we'll be next year, but essentially we're a developer partner of Sage. It means we're accredited to create add-ons for Sage 200, something which we've done as a business for in excess of 20 years, and we only at present develop for Sage 200. Delighted to say that we're currently the UK STP of the year, and actually a couple of weeks ago the directors and myself were in Dallas, where we made the platinum, the global platinum club as well, so something we're very, very proud of. And I guess the last thing just to note, we've got over 30 solutions available that complement Sage 200. We're not going to be talking about all of those today. We're just going to be focused on the WAP platform, which is our web authorization solution. But we're one of a number of STPs out there who Innov8 certainly work with that will complement and enhance your Sage 200 solution to make it more of a true ERP system. So where I wanted to start today was just, I suppose, some of the challenges that businesses and certainly the finance teams are facing. And, you know, one of those is, I think, I've read somewhere that you know, a finance department's role is to mitigate the financial risk through putting sort of processes and rules and controlling that from a business. I think the challenge, however, is you know, you want to control spend, etc. But one of the challenges, the rest of the business often wants convenience over those rules. And as a salesperson, I think we're probably the epitome of that, where, you know, it's, if we can skirt around some of those processes just to make life easier, we certainly will do. So there's always this conflict between, you know, convenience versus rules and procedures. I think what's also added and compounded this is, you know, for many years, flexible working has been a hot topic, and probably about 8 years ago, I think it was, I read an article where they said in the next 10 to 20 years, the office environment as we know it will no longer be the way it is. People will work from home, and the office will just be a meeting place once a month, once a quarter. Now, I think the pandemic, it's fair to say, has accelerated that process. And statistics at the start of January this year, they reckon that 30% of employees are now working remotely at least one day a week. You know, again, so that's very much moved that forward. Even things like remote jobs, it's being searched 18,000 times per month in Google. So, you know, the way that we work, the way that people want to work has changed. And again, this gives us that challenge in terms of how do we put the rules and these controls in place, but also maintain this flexible remote working force. Now, obviously, we want to maintain a happy, focused workforce, and I know training, they reckon, again, just some statistics that I read, the average business in the UK spends about £1,500 per year per employee on development. So whether that's sending them on a course or whether it's actually time invested in them on the job training. And, you know, we all know that trying to find good quality staff, keep those good quality staff, you know, it's very much a difficult environment all the time. You hear just people trying to find that. It just compounds this this challenge. So I suppose the the question, and I'm hoping like the WAP platform will start to fill some of those gaps, is how do companies like yourselves help manage those procedures versus convenience? Now, I think a number of areas that we can start to focus on really, and utilizing technology. Now, the technology is only as good as the people using it, and I'll talk about a couple of stories a little bit later on about companies I've dealt with, some successes and some failures in terms of the way that perhaps they've rolled that out. But I think there's some areas that certainly the WAP solution can really help yourselves as an organization. So one of those which we'll touch in on is around purchasing. So how do we automate the purchase process so we're controlling costs before we incur them? We'll come on to the purchase invoice automation. So recording your purchase invoices, but again, are there better ways of being able to do that? How can we reduce admin from the team? Expenses. Probably my favorite module inside the WAP platform, if it's not too sad to have a favorite module. I still hate doing expenses, by the way, but again, something that's close to my chest. Timesheet capture. So often, now we're trying to track what people are doing real time. So, different ways of capturing that. And then just a bit about holidays and HR. So I guess, what is WAP? Well, you've got Sage 200 at the core, and WAP is a web portal that sits in the same environment as your WAP install, but it wraps around Sage. So it's communicating where it needs to real time. So what you're not having to do is that double entry of information. And because it's accessible, depending on obviously how you deploy that, it's accessible anywhere you've got an internet connection and an appropriate browser. Well, then we can start to allow users to be able to access that information. But bringing it back to this convenience versus procedures rule, we can control what access those users have. So are they able to raise a requisition, for example? Are they able to approve it? What nominals can they select? But really, the flexibility of the approval routes is the key bit. So we're devolving responsibility, but we're controlling what information flows through to Sage where it needs to, based on those approval routes. So we're going to be touching, and you're going to see the web screens. There's a mobile app as well. The only anomaly to, I guess, what we're going to touch on is Sicon documents. Now, that actually sits inside of Sage 200. Now, it will become apparent why I'm going to talk about this a little bit later when we get to the purchase invoices. But again, where we can start to digitize and capture documents and store them in Sage, but make those visible back out into WAP. So again, rather than bits of paper flowing around the business. So let's start with purchasing. Now, as we know, implementing a PO process, for those of you who've tried it, it can be a bit of a challenge. You'll get feedback from your employees saying, well, I don't have time. I'm sure there's loads more I could have put on here, but can't we just carry on doing what we used to be doing? What's wrong with me quoting my own PO number? Or, well, I can't do that today because I'm not in the office. It'll have to wait till next week. So these are some of the excuses that you might get when you're trying to roll it out and trying to bring people on board. Interestingly, probably my favorite site that I went into, there was a gentleman who'd run their PO process for 20 plus years. And when we were talking through how does that process work, you went to his desk, he unlocked the bottom drawer, pulled out his book, and then he would write your name, the description at the high level of why you needed a PO number, and then he would give you a PO number which you then quoted. Nothing in Sage, no formal process for POs in Sage, but then he would lock the book in his bottom drawer. And when I said, well, what happens when he's on holiday, they said, well, we can't purchase anything in the organization until he gets back. So, that's an extreme example, but hopefully what you're going to see as technology starts to take effect, we can still put that level of control in, but actually make it far easier for people. So requisitions. So we're going to start with controlling those costs, as I said, before it becomes a PO. So via the WAP platform, you don't have to be a Sage 200 user. I log in, I've got my own username and password. We can control that. Now, I personally access it on my iPad in Safari. It works in Microsoft Edge as well. As I mentioned, there is an iOS and an Android app as well. But from a requisition, essentially, it's the same as a PO that you'd have in Sage 200. But what we're doing here is, as I access the web portal, we can see I can pick the suppliers. They're just going to flow through from Sage. So if we added a new supplier in Sage, it's available instantly in the web portal because we're sharing that information. The usual, we can add a free text line. We can add stock, and if we're adding stock, I can start to search for the stock items themselves, and it'll pull through buying prices. It will pull through the nominal. For those of you using Sicon projects or Sage's project accounting, again, we can pick projects as well and link those to it. So what we're doing there is, rather than be filling a piece of paper or even an Excel spreadsheet and then hand that in if somebody has to rekey this in once it's been approved, I'm doing the data entry for you. Now, the main part here then is, once I've submitted it, is it going out to be approved? And what you're going to see is everything's done within this single Sage screen. Now, as I come into approve, the approval routes, I think, as I mentioned, is really the flexibility behind the system. So a number of options. The most popular, or the most common, I would say, is just approval by nominal. So perhaps grouping by cost center, so your nominals by cost center or by department, and then being able to route that out to the appropriate person or persons, because it is possible to send it out to multiple people at the same time for them to approve it. Now, they can be multi-level approval routes. We can give users approval value. So if it's less than my value, then it will automatically flow through to Sage. If it's more, it will carry on up the chain. There's even options in here where you can see there's a peach color there next to the test text item. So we can actually start to analyze nominal budgets as well if you were to set those in. So often feedback from departments is, or certainly the finance team, is every day or every week we're getting asked, where are we with our budget? Well, let's just present those budgetary figures. So being able to see a live view of what you've actually incurred versus your budget, your month, year to date, or your actual or your annual, being able to see what's sat in deferred, maybe the value of purchase orders that have yet to be approved. So just giving them a real-time view. And then if it is over budget, we've got a client where if it's over £250,000 or if it's over budget, it goes out to 5 board members. And so long as 3 of them, any 3 approve it, then it will flow through. So again, bringing it back to this theme that I'm trying to run through today of this procedure versus convenience is, the convenience, I can access this whenever I want. So long as I've got an internet connection and an appropriate browser, but we're putting those controls that we need to put in as a finance department. And I mentioned there's the mobile app, so synchronize on the app. I'm not for 1 minute advocating working on a beach in Marbella, but it may well be you're abroad, or that excuse of I'm not in the office. Well, you've got your mobile phone, and I think there's some crazy statistics now about the number of people who've got access to a smartphone this day and age. So being able to remove those barriers. Once it's been approved, then you get your purchase order in Sage. So again, we've got visibility of that committed cost in Sage, and you could either deploy your current process, which is email that out from Sage, or because Sage will present WAP with a PO number, the employee could phone that through to the supplier. They can even, via the web portal, email a PDF copy of the PDF of the purchase order to their particular supplier as well, if you wish. And that can be automated if you need. So again, depending on how you want to set up what your processes are, devolving as much or as little of that responsibility as you go. Now, the other challenge that you'll often get is, I don't know what price. I don't care where we buy it from. I know that I need a laptop, I need a case, and I need X, Y, and Z. So we've also added in, now we've called it a project requisition. It actually doesn't have to be linked to a project. But the idea here is, for those of you who perhaps have got a procurement function. So again, take away those barriers. I don't know. I don't care about nominal codes. I don't, why are you giving this to me? Well, just write a list. Just write a list in here, whether it's existing stock items or free text lines of what it is you need, the specification, whatever that is. And actually that approval route can then go through to somebody in purchasing, the procurement person. They can then negotiate the best price. They can pick the supplier. If you've got your list of preferred suppliers, find the best price, pick the supplier, enter the price. Now, there might be 10 lines on there. and they might be for 10 different suppliers. Not a problem. Once we've submitted that, essentially the procurement have said, yep, this is the suppliers and the prices we're going to go with. That would then split into 10 separate requisitions to go down and get approved. So again, we've still got those levels of control in, but as a business, we're controlling even more what those buy prices are. We've even got scenarios where in the construction sector, your foreman's on site, they want to control the cost, they want to see those commitments, but the foreman's never going to load up his phone or his or her phone or log into a laptop and submit it, because just the job's too quick. But instead what they'll do, they'll scribble it on a piece of paper, they'll phone through the order, but then somebody in the site office will actually put all those orders on, and again it goes through. The foreman just signs them off then, and then they hit Sage. So there's different ways that you can roll that out. Now, the other side of it then is your invoices. So we've ordered the items and we now receive the invoice in, but it might be that as an organization you don't deploy purchase orders, so requisitions isn't relevant. Well, WAP is modular, so you only need to purchase those elements that are relevant for your business. So we've got a lot of clients just go straight with purchase invoice approvals. They might have that alongside requisitions just to complement and close the loop. So any invoices that don't match will go through for approval, but those that match fully, because we've already approved the PO, WAP can just automatically update. We can set variances as well, but it could be utility bills. Now, traditionally, what you will do is in the finance department, invoice comes in, and often when customers are deploying WAP, they'll move finance centrally. So the invoices come in, you find the PO. If there isn't one, you'll just enter a purchase invoice, and there you're going to find the invoice date. You're going to enter the reference, the goods value, and then you're going to split it across the nominals and do your VAT, and then you're going to save that. Now, depending on how you do it, you might use Sage's invoice authorization and then send a bit of paper around the business. Perhaps you put a stamp and you get 2 or 3 signatures, and then once that's signed, you'll then approve it inside of Sage. Or we've got some customers, they send the invoice round, it gets approved, and then they'll put the invoice on. Now, in the latter example, that's great. If there are any issues, we haven't put it in our Sage system, but you haven't got visibility of those costs, from an accruals perspective. So, and you've obviously still got to file that electronic copy. Now, I think, again, looking at some statistics in terms of purchase automation and accounts payable seems to be a big theme at the moment. There was an article in 2020 that stated that 72% of finance teams spend up to 10 hours per week, so person hours, per week, on accounts payable actions, obviously with this being one of those. So, you have got options with Sicon documents where, as we put it on, we can attach the invoice. So then we're going electronic. And that's a big step, and that's great. There's ourselves, there's a couple of other solutions out there that do a similar thing. But why don't we use technology? So what we've got is within Sicon documents, so this is the bit that sits inside of Sage, is things like document automation. So rather than sit there and type in those invoices in, email them up to a unique address, a PDF or a JPEG invoice, and then inside of Sage, so you're still doing your processing inside of Sage, our web API connects to that Cogidocs engine and pulls down each of those invoices into this holding area here, where if everything matches, so there's a lot of validation. So can it find a PO number? If we're looking for a PO number, has it been goods received? If you 3-way match, do the values match? Has it been able to read the net, the VAT, the gross? Is it found the invoice number? Is the date? Are we happy with the date? Are there any duplications? They'd be sat there ready to go. But you might have some that need attention where it's not been able to identify the supplier, or for a number of reasons, or it's not found the correct invoice number. So again, giving you that levels of control. But certainly for clients, we've got our largest one at the moment using this, over 150,000 invoices a year they're processing, and this has saved them a huge amount of time. So it's going to go through that validation. It's going to tell you there if it's been enabled to find the PO number, or the PO has already been goods received, perhaps it's a duplicate invoice. Now, I tend to call this the sniper's eye. I'm sure there's a more technical term, but allowing you to be able to train the invoice yourself. So not having to come back to us, pay for consultancy, just being able to draw around the details. So, you know, where is the invoice number? I've seen some invoices where there were 3 different invoice numbers. Well, which one is it? So train the system where that is, and then tell it, okay, that's the invoice number. So it learns over time. You train about 5 invoices and then it flows through. So again, starting to be able to drive these efficiencies utilizing that technology, but still giving you that control. Now, those invoices that do need to be approved, well, it hits Sage as an authorized, but then comes back out to WAP. But the main benefit here is we can route that down a different set of approval routes, and there's options again. There's nominal. We can do it by supplier. So there's a number of different options. But enabling the user, because you've used Sicon documents, to be able to view a copy of that invoice. So rather than the process that you might be utilizing at the moment where you print it off, put the stamp on it, I've seen it where it gets scanned in, gets emailed, they print it off, sign it, scan it in, email it back, or whether it's walking it around the business. Again, just utilizing this technology, you know, anywhere I've got that connection, being able to log in. And just on the mobile theme, well, actually, once I synchronize, being able to see a copy of the invoice on a mobile phone as well, as I said, whether that's an iOS or an Android-based device. Now, once it's approved, those are the typical transactions that you'll see there. So you'll see it was posted originally to Sage's unauthorized purchases nominal, which means it can't be paid whilst it's sat there. But then once it's approved, you can then, it credits and debits out to whatever the nominals were. And there's some nice little facilities in there where we've got some clients, finance don't necessarily know the specific nominal that it needs to be coded to. So often what they'll do is they'll send the bit of paper around and the budget holder will write the nominal code they want on, and then that's what's going to get posted. Well, inside of WAP, we can enable that user from a sort of a prescribed list of nominals that they can select from for them to allow them to make that change. So as the invoice comes through, they recode it. Once it's fully approved, it credits the unauthorized and then debits whatever that final nominal was. We've also added in a reversing journal inside of Sage. So you get to period end and you want to, you could get everybody to approve them, or if not, just run the reversing journal, credit, debit, debit, credit, and of course you can then close off your month end. Now, this is probably my favorite part in the invoice approvals. Now, I didn't fully understand it to begin with, but if you think about it, you've gone digital with your documents. So finding your documents is far easier. They're archived, they're stored on the server, so they're backed up. We don't need oodles of space to be able to store the physical copies. It's far quicker to find a document. So that's great. That document's gone out, so the approver's able to see it inside of WAP as they're approving the invoice. Fantastic. But a lot of organizations, it could be the finance director, it could be the CEO, the manager, whoever it is, they want to sign off the suggested payments run before it gets paid. And often this is where there's a bit of a disconnect, because we've gone digital with the invoices, but they want to see a copy of the invoices as well. So we have to print them out. So what we've also added into the purchase invoice authorization is picking up the suggested payments run and routing that through to, and you either do it by supplier or value, to the managing director, for example. So they will see then a list, just the same as you would with your suggested payments report. But inside of Sage, we can't pay it through that routine, because you will get a pop-up saying it's not yet been approved. And we can even give them the option where, if you go into the amend suggested payment screen, you can tweak the values. Well, there you go. Allow them to say, well, okay, we're not going to pay this one, or we're going to part pay this particular invoice. And once they've made those changes and they approve all, then that will release it inside of Sage for finance to be able to pay it. So again, what we're doing there is we're utilizing that technology. We're going digital, and actually a lot of the time, if you look at the types of invoices, fewer and fewer coming through paper-based these days. They are still digital, so it's saving us having to print that off. It's quicker to process, but we've still got the controls. We're giving better control and visibility for the approval process, but also then to the wider business still being able to control the payment run, but just in a far simpler way, for whoever it needs to sign that off. So expenses, as I said earlier, probably my favorite module, but it's not because I like doing expenses. It's one of the easiest ways to control and reduce operating costs. Now, my background, I've been at Sicon about 8 years now. I worked at Sage for nearly 10 years prior to that. And in a commercial role, I was did a lot of research into the expense sector as we were looking at partnerships at the particular time. And I remember Aberdeen Group, they had a survey. Now I'm going back far too many years than I'd care to admit these days, but at the time they ran a survey, and they one of the feedbacks was that 40% of expense claims at the time were fraudulent. Not because people were trying to pull the wool over the company's eyes, but because they didn't know what the policy was. They didn't realize that they can't claim mileage from their home if they go via the office, those sorts of things. So by deploying a digital expense claim system where it's presenting the policy, then happy days. Now for me at the time, I would do, I think, somewhere in the region of 30 to 35,000 miles a year. We had a 3-month cutoff, and I was that typical person. I would leave it right the way up to the last day, and I would sit there. I had 2 monitors. On the one monitor, I'd have my Excel spreadsheet. On the other monitor, I'd have a link to the HMRC fuel rate to understand, had the fuel rate changed and when did it change. I had a link to our policy. I had my calculator. I had a link to a website of how to calculate, reduce VAT and those sorts of things. And I would sit down, and it would take me somewhere between half and 3/4 of a day with interruptions to do my expenses. I'd have Google Maps open as well, so trying to work out what the mileage was. And to say I hated that process, yeah, it was just painful. But it was my fault. I left it till the last minute. I would then print this out, sign it, staple all of my receipts, put it in an envelope into the internal mail, which would then go via special delivery down to London, where my line manager worked. And if he found a spelling mistake, he would put it back in the post, back up, and he would reject it. I kid you not. His argument was, if you can't get your expenses right, how can I expect you to get your to write, respond to a tender? Now, to be fair, I learned to be far more accurate, which was a good thing, but it was annoying. So once we'd done that toing and froing, once he'd signed off, he put it again, special delivery, up to the head office, where they would be processing somewhere in the region of 500 expense claims a month. Now, that was the bit I always forgot. So I'd be whinging and moaning about mine. I was always out of pocket. I'd use my credit card, so of course I'm paying interest on that. And I'd just, I've wasted all this time. But I'd forget that as soon as it got to the head office, somebody there had to check them. They had to manually key those into the finance system. And from a cash flow perspective, I was the worst, because they were quite hefty expense claims. So of course, there was always this hockey stick, and I certainly wasn't the only one doing that, leaving it right the way up to the last moment. So roll forward using WAP. Now, when I first joined Sicon, I worked from home, and I have never submitted a hard copy receipt. I've been using WAP since we joined. Obviously, it's evolved over time, but I still hate the process, and I still hate doing admin. It actually makes my life a lot easier. And now as a line manager, approving those expenses again is far simpler as well. So things like with vehicles, that tends to be the one. Certainly the way fuel's going at the moment, I think, is it 4 times a year the HMRC will review, 3 or 4 times anyway, review the mileage. Well, in the background of the system, where should that change, somebody with admin privileges just makes the appropriate changes to the fuel grid and just adjusts with a from date. I just keep putting my expenses on. If it's a private vehicle, well, the 10,000 mile cutoff, as soon as it hits the 10,000, it will drop to the lower rate that you've set. Google Map integration, this is a game changer for me. So I've got my favorite setup, which is the office. I've got home, but being able to say, well, I started at the office. Where did I go? London Stansted in this case. So it was a return journey. Do I need to take off a regular commute? Did I go from home? So do I need to take the distance off to the office? Now, literally, you click on calculate and it calculates the quickest route, not necessarily the shortest. You know, you wouldn't want to go to London straight from north to south. You'd obviously use the ring road or the M25. Now, there is an argument. Well, I didn't do that route. Me personally, by the time I've worked out the specific route I did, I've probably cost myself more in time. But some people, you know, they'll use a different route. So we've built in things such as it will show you what Google Maps said. So if you do get audited, you can see that's what Google Maps said we can claim. But I can amend it and then I give a reason why. So roadworks, I had to take a detour, whatever that would be. But again, far quicker for being able to put those on. The real game changer though for me is I've got a company credit card, and often I forget which one I've used, whether I put it on personal or the corporate credit card. So what Vicky, our finance manager, does, she downloads from Lloyd's. We use it's a CSV, the statement, and then she imports that into the back end. Now we've got the card set up, and my unique card number's linked to me, so it will then create me an expense claim. Now I can't delete any of the lines because it's got to reconcile, but then I can go in and I can make changes. I can pick a project which we use. I can what type of expense is it. As I select the type, it will pop up with the policy as well, so I can see details of that. I can change the VAT rate. I can do my attachment as well, so I can go digital with my receipts. So if I tend to upload them to iCloud or OneDrive, depending which device I'm using, and then I like to do my expenses when I'm sat at the desktop, so I just drag and drop the receipts in, so they're then stored. And because we're using Sicon documents, once it's fully approved, it creates a purchase invoice either against the linked credit card account, or if it's a personal expense, against my personal purchase ledger account. But it actually attaches those receipts to the transaction as well. So again, they're easy to find. So as I say, from an expenses perspective, huge time saver. You know, still doing the same thing. Obviously, a lot less mileage this day and age. You know, certainly as you can see with the remote, but we're making utilizing that technology to make life easier. So we'll quickly whip through a couple of the others. Timesheets. Now, this is an interesting one. Often, in my experience, you know, people are capturing time for projects. So as I said earlier, WAP will integrate with Sage Project Accounting or Sicon projects. There's a tighter integration with Sicon projects just because we can control that. But again, you can use either or. And whether it's linked to a work pattern, whether I'm entering hours and minutes or hours and decimals, we can capture that time. We can pick what cost rate it is, so it's going to be pulled through. But whether it's on the mobile app or in the web portal, again, being able to record the time, even notes as to what did I work on there. But again, being able to sign that off going through. What's interesting in the timesheet entry here, you can see enter timesheet for Ruth user. We've got some clients where, again, culturally, it's just not right. I've got friends who are plasterers who are absolutely incredible. You know what they can do with the tools there to plaster your wall is it's a work of art. But you're never going to get a piece of paper out of them. Get them to fill in a timesheet, you've got no chance. They just put their hand out, they want their cash, and they're going to go and wet the whistle. So in that instance, rather than trying to force them to try and do something, here you can still set them up, but then you've got a site admin, or you've got, you know, a centralized admin person who just fills in the scribbles that they've done, but digitally. So we're capturing it, but then approving it before it flows through. And as I say there, we've got the app as well. From an approval perspective, again, as that comes through, similar theme. Configure your approval routes. There's a number of different options there, typically requesting user, or it might be by project. But allow me to approve it. You could allow me to make amendments to that as well, but being able to see that time and capturing it in a nice visual way. Holidays, well, really this came from the holidays, and the HR came from us, you know, users saying, well, if I'm logging in, doing my requisitions, expenses as well, and I've got timesheets, well, holidays complement timesheets. So, you know, can't we put some HR type stuff in there as well? I'm just logging into the same portal. Well, yeah. So holidays, being able to set up what your entitlement is, allowing them to request holiday, see a calendar of who else is off. So are there any conflicts? Am I likely to get that time off as well? Add a request in. Is it hours or is it days and half days? Leave type. There's toil options if you're using timesheets as well, and being able to then send that out for approval. Once it's approved, it updates my entitlement, but also then can fire out an iCal attachment so I can put it in my calendar. And then last but not least, HR. Now, my background is enterprise HR payroll. So, in terms of, I suppose, where this sits, it's the real benefit is you've got all the information in one place. It's self-serve, so I can update my address details. I can update my next emergency contacts, next of kin. Bank details is great because that'll update, if we've got expenses, that'll update my purchase ledger bank details as well. And again, you've got, that gets tracked. If you've already got a system in place, which is probably more mid-market, as I would say, it's never going to compete with that. But this is great if you're currently using Excel spreadsheets. You've got Sage 50 HR, something like that. It's just great to be able to capture those details centrally. Absence, being able to record your sickness absence or request doctors or dental leave as well. Being able to see my job history as well, probation and those sorts of details. So company documents with read and accept functionality, accident log. So there's some really rich functionality, but again, it depends on, I suppose, what your starting point is. So close to my allotted time today, just wanted to summarize and hopefully gives you a bit of a feel for what it is. Now, obviously, every company is unique, what you're looking for. So I'd always say, if there's anything in here that resonates and you're interested, get in touch with your Innov8 account manager and arrange a one-to-one demonstration where we can run through that. There's a wealth of information on our website as well. But I guess just to tie it back into the themes of this procedures versus convenience, for me, it's utilizing the correct use of technology. Now, if that's Sicon, fantastic. If it's other solutions that complement Sage, then great for that as well. It's about finding the right system for you to control that. Now, what I will say is, and I'm about to say, don't just roll out and expect it now. I don't know who's on the call, but often it's great. We've got the right technology, and we go, my parents, I was like, right, they want to get into email. There you go. Here's a computer. And they never used it. It sat gathering dust. And what it was I just assumed because I use technology every day, they would adopt it. But actually, they couldn't get their heads around it. They tried it a couple of times. They were scared and just never got used. And you will have that. You've got your Gen Z. So coming through now, we're used to all mobile devices. But you've also got your Gen X and your boomers as well across the business. So you've got a wide range of people with different technical abilities. So we've got to be conscious of that as we start to roll it out. And just at the end, I'll leave you with one story just on that. So making sure it's the correct use of technology for your organization. Most important thing, which this type of approach gives you, is that single version of the truth. So we're not duplicating purchase orders, so in two different systems. We're not holding invoices into separate databases. All of that information ends up in Sage. So you've got one version of a purchase order, but you've got the history and WAP of the approval audit trail. One version of your documents in Sage and your invoices, your expense payments, one version of your nominal, one version of your purchase ledger as well. Reducing risk. So risk of error when posting. If you take the document automation where it's doing the checks for you, have we got duplicate invoices? The things that you'd be doing anyway, but just using that technology to reduce risk. The budgets as well, just visibility of, actually, I might have 20 requests from my team for buying things. Well, I've got visibility. We're going to be over our annual budget. So which one of those am I going to accept, which keeps us inside of the budget, which allows us to hit our company goals? Very important, certainly as an organisation, Sicon, we've got a foundation now where, you know, it's about looking at recycling, and that anything we can do to reduce paper, it's got to be a good thing. So again, going digital, encouraging your suppliers to email you electronic copies rather than sending them in via paper. Rather than printing them off to get them signed, doing that digitally. Well, that's got to be a good thing. And more importantly, allowing all the users to focus on the role. So I know I need to buy these things rather than have to then think, well, who do I need to get to approve this? The system's just going to take care of that once it's all configured. You know, the document automation, actually the amount of time that you could free up just processing that and then it going out digitally to be approved, you know, where you can focus on more strategic elements as well. So just before I open up to any questions, the last story, and this is a true story. An existing customer deployed Sicon Requisitions. They were unhappy, so I went on site with the business partner and went through a series of questions and started and said, so obviously it's not working. So does that mean you can't log into WAP? No, that works. Okay, so it means you can't raise a requisition? No, that works. So the requisition doesn't go to be approved? No, that's fine. So once it's approved, it doesn't hit Sage? No, that works. Does Sage give the user the PO number? Yeah, all of that's fine. I said, well, what's the problem? And deadpan, they said, nobody will use it. And the reason that always resonates with me is because we can't control that. That was just, you know, it was dropped in, expect everybody to use it. So what I would say there is utilize the experience at Innov8, utilize the experience at Sicon. If you like what you've seen, obviously, and been through demonstrations and you do diligence as you roll it out, there's lots of different ways that you can do that, you know, and that's very much what you're buying in as well. Right. Hopefully some of that's resonated with you. I guess, Michael, are there any questions?
Yeah, there's nothing that's fired through from the chat, so we'll just pause if anybody has anything that they want to ask at this point. Feel free to unmute yourselves and ask any questions. If not, I know I've definitely got one for you, Steve.
I've got a couple of questions.
Yeah, yep. Absolutely. Go for it, James.
Is it possible for an approver to receive an email notification rather than going onto the portal? And then secondly, with regards to the purchase requisitions and the expenses, is there scope to capture a job number where relevant?
Yep. Great question. So first one, in terms of an email, yeah, that's the process. It's something I've not wanted to get into too much detail. So when a requisition, expense, whatever it is submitted for approval, the user, sort of the approver, will receive an email notification. So it will come through telling what they need to approve. Now, they can't approve it in the email. The reason for that twofold. One is security, but two is that it's going to be a wealth of information we need them to absorb, but they can click on the link in there, which would load up the web page, or, you know, it will prompt them just to log in. In terms of the second question, yeah, so in terms of jobs, we call them projects this day and age, but yeah, WAP, all of the WAP modules will link to, well, not all of them, because some of them are not relevant, HR isn't relevant, but will link to Sicon projects, which used to be called job costing, or Sage project accounting. So with that setup, again, you've got options whether you restrict what projects the user can see or whether they can see them all, but they can select the project. You don't have to set them up in WAP. They will just flow through as you create them in Sage, and then they can pick the cost header. I think project accounting calls it. We call it a project header. And then as you process that through, then yeah, you'll see that transaction against the appropriate project.
Thank you.
Brilliant. The only thing I was going to finish off just that by saying is obviously huge thanks to yourself, Steve. And you mentioned like the procedure versus the convenience side of things. So if someone was looking at embracing and embarking on this kind of product, what would your number one top tip be in terms of just trying to identify those processes that maybe people have in place already to then embrace something like WAP?
My top tip would be, and it's a balance, because as we always know, you know, is it too many cooks spoil the broth, or whatever phrase my parents used to use when I was a kid. But often I see a lot of decisions made at a senior level and go, right, brilliant, this is what we want. I would embrace users, the end users, especially something with WAP who are going to be involved with this, shortlist the solutions that you're looking for. But then during that, once you kind of understand what elements you're going to use, us from a sales perspective, we understand and we discussed the approval routes, get a couple of the end users into those sort of sessions as well. Don't give them decision as to, well, it's your choice, but just say, look, we're exploring this is what it means. And what you'll often find is some objections which you probably wouldn't have thought of, at the ground level of things that, well, we haven't got the internet in the office, for example. I appreciate most offices will do, but so you're going to have some of those examples there. But it also means then as you start to roll it out, you've already got some stakeholders at the ground who could be talking around. But yeah, that would be my top tip, certainly at the front end. As you deploy the project, again, don't be afraid to take your time. I think sometimes as well, we want to get the value out of it straight away. Some of the most successful sites I've seen, some of them, they've gone big bang. They've had to, but they've involved a lot more employees. But one site that springs to mind, they were 17 care homes. And the initial discussions were, well, no, we'll just roll it out and then we'll just deal with the issues, and managed to persuade them just to roll it out to 2 of the care homes initially. And then they learned a lot of the lessons as they went through, tweaks the approval routes. So as they started to roll it out to the other care homes, already it was far smoother and it was adopted far easier. So yeah, that would be probably my number 1 tip there, Michael.
Fantastic. No, I really appreciate you going through that. Just to finish off, if there are no further questions, we do have a date earmarked for our July event. We're just in the process of just firming up the speaker, but just a date for your diaries is the 26th of July. Appreciate we are heading into that summer holiday schools period, and there might be less availability and that type of thing, but we're keen to persist with our Innov8 Insight sessions throughout the summer, just to give you that opportunity to continue that learning. And we will be recording the sessions as well, so even if you aren't around, you can always register and access the recording for your own convenience. And then finally, just from myself, just huge thank you to Steve and also Nikki from Sicon for organising today. And if there's nothing further, feel free to drop off, and we'll look forward to seeing you on our next session. Thank you.